Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Deep Thoughts. Today's episode is about our senses. They say we have 5 senses. What are senses? Well, the most generic definition of our senses, they are defined as the mechanisms by which we are alive and sense that we are alive and confirm that we are alive. Without them, we are nothing. So I work in virtual reality, not like you see it in the mass audiences with headsets that fucking give you headaches and all that shit, but I'm inventing a brand new form of virtual reality which hopefully you will experience. And so we are constantly doing little experiments to figure out what is reality. Because if we were to replace it, truly replace it, for an entertainment experience or an educational experience, one has to know what one is talking about. I have spent years studying how, light enters the eyeball, how all of the different chains of command from, photon to chemical to electron to chemical to electron, pathways in the brain in order to recognize sight. The various mechanisms of 3D sound, what makes a person believe something is behind them versus in front of them, and it goes far deeper than left-right panning, front-rear panning. It's intense. But so on one side of the fence, I've got all this technology that I'm working on with a bunch of other brilliant people. And then on the other side, I have this show where I get the privilege of really discussing sort of the esoteric nature of being alive. We philosophize on this show, right? I say we because I say something, then you say something, then I say something. And it just goes a little slower than a normal conversation because it takes me, several hours to make an episode and get it edited and up there. But then you guys reply, then I'll make a video replying to you. And if anyone were to pay very close attention to the way this show has gone and have a meticulous nature to them from maybe not the very first episode, but that one's kind of catching on. The first couple episodes are catching on. And then you study what I'm saying and what the comments say. And then what I'm saying, what the comments saying. There is a three-dimensional relationship going on between this show and the listeners. And that's very common for shows that are watched. But I think that the weight and the value of the comments from you guys are... it feels like graduate school, doesn't it? We're having really good conversations between us. But we were doing an experiment 3 days ago, actually 2 days ago, in our office up north. Just 4 of us in a room. There's been 4 of us working together for about 10 months, and my partner and I, my business partner and I, he and I have been at it for another 8 months before that for a very specific invention. But prior to that, I've been in virtual reality all the way back to 1992. It was actually, from 1990 and 1992. I had a separate gig in Southern California. I went to Northern California, came back to Southern, and now finally they're throwing billions of dollars at that industry, even though most of the solutions are atrocious. Nevertheless, we're here. But one of my partners was trying to get us to understand the mind's eye. And he puts his hands over his eyes and he wants us all to do it. And he says, I want you to envision $1 billion. And so we're all kind of sitting there going, all right, okay, yeah, sure. And then he says, what image did you come up with? And most of us were like, pile of cash, stack of cash. He goes, but was it $1 billion? And we said, no, not really, because we can't imagine $1 billion, like accurately, right? He says, do it again. Close your eyes. I'll give you another goal. He says, envision. He goes, try to envision a gold ingot. Do you have a vision for a gold ingot? And we're all like, yeah. And he goes, see? You have the ability to see things that you can conceive of, but you can't see things you can't conceive of, right? Yeah. That was a neat experiment we were doing. But what happened to me was related but not directly related, which was utterly astonishing to me, and it was only because I noticed it vividly and I was able to put words to it. And this is kind of a neat thing. Don't do this if you're driving. Wait till you get home. But while I had my hands over my eyelids to really reduce the light, our studio is a film studio that's being used for scientific research, but I noticed that I could see with my eyes closed to a degree. I felt like my utter presence to my body was that I could see with my epidermis. Now, if you think about the rods and cones in your eye, you're talking about a set of cells that have various properties and various functions when photons bang into them. And that, that compresses a chemical structure inside them, which then gets reported again through electrons to the back of your brain, and then we metabolize it into sight. And the interesting thing is for the first time in my life, I sat there with my fingers over my eyes, and I felt like I could totally see my nose, I could see my hands, I could see things. And, for those of you who are into neurology and sort of a holographic universe, my mind does have a three-dimensional perception of itself. That's why you get phantom pain and from limbs that are missing or something like that. But this was a little bit different. I felt like I could see color and light, and way beyond what leaks through your eyelids. But remember, I'm putting my fingers over my eyelids, which if you haven't done that in your lifetime, it's really dark. Outside of putting some sort of mechanical device over your eyes to block light, the other one is to put the palm of your hand over your eyes, which is just really dark because it's thick, right? But it dawned on me for a second that my epidermis, made out of just an absolutely infinitely dense mesh of capillaries, which is where your blood goes from blue to red, where it's oxygenated. They also sense temperature, right? So if I poke you with a hot thing or a cold thing, it's your epidermis, your skin, that figures it out and then shocks and pulls back the muscle, right? Now, of course, when you stick inside the body, there's other things inside the body which will help you out. But I really honestly believe that the epidermis is 95% of all pain related to puncture wounds. I think the inside of the body has been designed to be pretty painless, because then we might live in a little too much aches and pains. It takes quite a bit to create a pain internally. Gallstone or a kidney stone or something. But I thought about thinking, okay, the mind knows how to metabolize energy into sight. The mind knows how to metabolize energy into sound, touch, right? All of our senses are the interpolation of energy into the brain cavity, into a gestalty kind of image, a projector inside your head. Now, we're going to get into soul, but I'm just trying to go the old Kurzweil realm first. And it just, at first it just dawned on me that my body could be reusing various organs to substitute for other organs. And, I'm not blind. It wasn't like I spent hours and days and months not being able to see. But all of a sudden I felt like my body My skin was an eyeball. Now, the other thing is I have a pretty good visual memory. So, when you close your eyes, you say, look at this. Now close your eyes. Now think about what you see. It's an interesting exercise because your mind's eye will take a Polaroid snapshot of what you're looking at and put it inside your head. But it sort of starts to fade away, morph into something else. And then the second thing occurred to me, which is, why have I not had this thought before? And why hasn't anyone ever suggested that this could happen? Ever, to me, in my lifetime. Why is it that when it took the movie Sixth Sense to really bring up the conversation to average society that there are 5 senses, and that the reason why this movie is interesting is because it has a 6th sense, seeing dead people. The longer we are alive, the more our brains and our minds and our perception of reality gets closed if we do not take an active role in holding open the blast doors. Like all those sci-fi movies where someone's, got to hold open a door so everyone can escape. That door is trying to shut. The more that you ingest mass media of any kind, movies, television, think about it. They tell you how things are. And you must accept it to be accepted into the tribe of people who watch TV. A god-awful tribe to be a part of. Think about all the courses that are in school and college. They are courses about a bona fide subject. Boom. Math. Religion. Only if you dabble in a little bit of philosophy are you going to get close to some professor somewhere in the world encouraging you to expand your mind. The arts in America, at least, I can't speak for any other country, are horrible because the people that are becoming teachers have no artistic skills. And so the K through 6, or I guess maybe it's 5 now, 5th grade here in America, there's no education on art because the teachers can't do anything. They can't even draw a turkey with their hand, for fuck's sake. And so the game is to get your kid inside a box as quickly as possible, right? Now, I know what some of you are saying. You're legitimately itemizing the kids who are, your sort of social justice warriors. They have, I think they've crawled into a fascism box, a racism box, a hate box. But you think about, if you've been in the military before, you know what boot camp can do to a punk-ass kid. It can break your shit down and build you back up to be an adult. Which is why I think that, I've never been against the idea of, going in and doing a mandatory year of military service to your country. I think that would be fabulous. With the senses, think about it. How important is this conversation? Well, I'm talking about the very collection of data inputs that give you the sense of who you are as a person. The more data inputs you have, the more of a person you can become. Less data, well, you start becoming a human robot. Our Ruski brothers, the Russians across the pond, in their educational system, they require the most rounded food group of categories for you to learn before you're allowed to graduate school. At least they used to. But you were to engage the arts in a musical level, on a physical level of some sort. You could do dance or some other things. You were to paint. You were to draw. You were to learn a science. You were to learn economics. And I'm sure there's areas of Russia that don't have such privileges, but for the areas where they are at their best, this is what you're supposed to learn. And that's to round out the mind. You ever study samurais? I feel like when I talk about samurai data, it feels like Hollywood and video games have so sensationalized this into almost folklore as if they didn't exist. But they did exist. and the history on them is actually pretty solid. I always feel silly, though. But they were to write poetry. They were to be botanists. They were to engage the fragile as much as they were to engage the unthinkable physical. They were to be political. They were to understand philosophy. The rhyme and reason why they exist was to be driven down inside their minds. Where is that today? What college has a curriculum that even cares that you get the most three-dimensional thought process developed to analyze on a second-to-second basis who you are as a being, when that is truly, if anything, what you are? Forget the I'm a mailman, I'm a fireman, I'm a doctor. At first, you're a being. We are in an era of humanity where the second one gets bored being a being, they run into a telephone and just sit there for fucking hours scrolling and clicking and getting into arguments with people, posting absolute drivel. Now drivel comes in 10 colors. But now what if I said to you, this argument and this, I shouldn't say argument, but this area of conversation, which is the senses, or I should say are the senses, we are babies. We are infants. We are children. Most of us. The gurus and the Buddhist monks, they are not children. They, if anything, are the closest thing that we've ever metabolized up or raised into an adult when it comes to the being that we are. There's a very interesting reality, and it's very simple, that if I said, look, I want you to wash one car, and you say, all right, you wash one car. I'll say, how was that experience? What did you learn? Oh, well, cars are dirty, man. I got, Dawn dishwashing liquid's kind of good for this. Never thought about it. And then I say, okay, now wash 1,000 cars, 10,000 cars, 100,000 cars. I guarantee you after 10,000 cars, if I said, what have you learned about washing a car? Your answer to me is going to be philosophical about yourself, most likely. Because you were doing something over and over and over again, and you were bored several times throughout the process. And so in order to eclipse the boredom, you had to turn the car wash into a ballet, into a kata, into something that was absolutely spiritually congruent with your being. If you were to be up and dedicate, say, 16 hours a day just to get through your 10,000 as quickly as possible, you're going to optimize the entire process to get cars done quicker. At the same time, you're probably going to increase the accuracy of doing it. It will become a much more intense experience. And when you get done, you will have gone through a spiritual process. Your senses will be utterly and completely heightened. How you get tired, when you get tired, how you sleep, how you wake up, when and where you eat, how you hold a sponge with your hand. And that's why I think that the more that we engage the metrics of being alive, a lot more things can happen. Now, let me just, overlay on top of this car analogy what I'm really talking about here. What do we say about things that we do over and over and over again? One of the little catchphrases, which I think is very accurate, is rinse and repeat. Go back to zero and do it again. Go back to zero and do it again. All right. What is every day of your life? What is every day of your life? What do you do 365 times before the sun circles, or the earth circles the sun, right? You live life every single day. Now, what if I came up to you and I said, I can prove to you that you're much bigger than a human being. You're much more intricate than a human being. And you say, what are you talking about? So I go, well, let's go through the exercise slowly. And I say, who are you? What are you? Don't worry about your name. Don't worry about the job that you're in, where you live. Just tell me, as if I am an alien visiting from another world, and I can't quite be there to assess it myself, but you have to tell me what you are. Perhaps it's just a radio conversation with an alien. Well, what are you? How are you able to answer that question? Well, you're going to reach into the pool of senses that you recognize, and you're going to itemize it back to the person on the other line. And provided they have some mechanism to understand what you're saying, and your language is rich and deep and thorough, they'll be able to paint a picture of you on the other side and determine whether or not visiting you is a good idea. Douglas Adams had a great story about a race of people that were offended by a human, and they tore across the universe to invade and get revenge. And as soon as they got here, they got swallowed by a dog, because the one thing they failed to calculate was scale. I thought that was fucking brilliant. But the analogy of talking to an alien over a radio station or something is really an analogy of you talking to yourself and recognizing what you are. Inside the brain, and then again, we'll spend the second half going into soul relationships here, but inside the brain there are neurons that are taking on certain responsibilities. They have at least mapped, the surface of the brain with various organs in your body. And if you've ever seen that really weird graphic of a brain where the hands are a giant portion of your brain because there's so much articulation and things going on, and as each limb is barely used, the quadrant in the brain that is assigned to that area of your body is very minimal, right? But I told one of my partners this, and it just struck me as something I need to say on the show. I doubt this is the first person who's ever said it, and it's pretty obvious to all of you, which is the following. Every day we are alive, the world is trying to close our minds. Every day. Now that's just a statement based on the natural attrition that happens to a human being who is not taking control of themselves. Once you take control of yourself, stop polluting your third eye with fluoride and mercury and aluminum. Stop eating food that is telling your body not to procreate. You reverse the process. Instead of seeing it shrink, you see it expand. And it can expand in a really linear fashion, which is growth at a constant rate, or you can see an exponential explosion of growth, which might peter out and come back down, but nevertheless you grow. Let's cross the pond now and bring in the soul as a mechanism here. I was listening to one of my partners discuss the brain, and the subject of memories came into the conversation. He says, we don't know where all this stuff goes. And I'm just sitting there going, it's your soul. It goes into the database of the universe through your soul. Your soul is you, and you have infinite access to the entire database of all knowledge in the universe. And to the degree you have the ability to articulate what you are looking for, you can send a little robotic arm down the hallway to grab the tape and bring it to you for what you're looking for. Sometimes the query has to be rewritten several times within a split second. When you're asking the universe for an answer, you might be ambiguous and it doesn't understand you, and so you have to say it again. What I always imagine is there's someone on the other side listening to me, trying to make sense of it all, and they're not necessarily God. It's like God lets our relatives help us out, which keeps the game kind of fun, right? Whatever. But I'll form a query. If it's good, I get it right away. If I'm being vague, I don't get it. If I re-clarify, I get it. It's interesting. We talk about the five senses, and then we all kind of have fun with everything over 5. So 6 could be seeing dead people. 6 could be seeing auras. seeing the future. It's a bunch of different stuff, right? And it's all arbitrary in terms of how we divide it up and consider one a different category than the other. But how would the soul play a role when it comes to the senses? One of the things you'll run into real quickly when you try to be very pragmatic about the soul, because there's an ethereal conversation we can have about the soul, which is to keep it very sort of mysterious and cloud-like, and then we can talk about its generalities and that sort of thing, which we're going to get to in this episode. But for those of you who are more scientific, or you're more scientifically prone, you're pragmatic, you're looking at it saying, well, how does it actually connect to my body? That's sort of a question I'd like to answer before I go any further in believing it exists. For me, it has to do with a couple different thought processes. Perhaps it is a very mechanical, well-explained attachment in that it connects perhaps to the base of your spine, your spinal cord. You know, a giant squid has essentially a spinal cord as a brain. It's a tube about the size of your pinky. When the squid's 50 feet long, okay, its brain is about as big as my pinky, and it's a hollow tube, right? And again, there's theories that their neurons are actually in their limbs, but then you can cut off the limb of a squid and it'll grow back. I believe that's the case, right? But the other one is to say, what if you go back to my gravity episode about ethereal winds being gravity, which I think is absolutely fucking conclusive, you have the analogy of a current, a vortex current in a river. You know, rivers go downstream and they hit obstacles like bridge supports and they spin water and you create a current. And if you swim in that, it'll suck you to the bottom and you can die. But as long as you stay out there, majestic. When your bathtub drains, same situation. Now imagine this. I get you to understand it's really just water. But because water behaves in a certain way, we give it designations. A water has a wave. A water has a drain, right? Now, water can be rain, it could be a storm, it could be a cloud. It's fucking water in the end. It's exactly what the universe is like, except it's ethereal particles. Now, if you're in that river, you're standing there looking at it, and I'm pointing this out, and you get it, and you're cool. And I take a big bucket of red dye, and I dump it in the water, upstream. Here comes this blood red cloud coming down the river, and it hits that vortex. Some of it goes past the vortex, most of it goes down. And within a few minutes, all that red dye goes down inside the vortex, spins out the bottom, and then continues downstream. And within a couple seconds after that, it was as if I never put any dye in the river at all, except for maybe what sticks to the pylon from the bridge. So the question is what is the movement model of the soul in relation to the body? One would assume that the soul has some movement, given that all the people that have had near-death experiences typically have some discussion of movement through the universe. They hover over their bodies. They go up tunnels. They float to the center of the universe. Those who smoke DMT definitely go towards the center of the universe. There's some movement. The Hindus talk about the out-of-body experiences in which one is connected to the body through the silver cord. First time I ever smoked salvia, it was like a very small percentage, I don't even know, maybe 25% or whatever it was. I smoked it, and the second I smoked it, I felt like I had a bar going through the bottom of my chin, out the top of my forehead, and it felt like a silver pipe. Most bizarre thing. It did not feel like a cord. It felt like I had a swing set pull in my head. Now, some of you might be asking, why am I belaboring the connection between the soul and the body? That is because in the first part of this conversation, with the five senses that we were raised to believe in, it is a very hardcore black and white reality for us. When it comes to the soul's relationship, well, we only have confident men who believe their own bullshit when it comes to the soul, like yours truly. We believe that we have seen things that are irrefutable, that then kind of give away the imagery of how the soul might work. But now there's this sort of, again, this is the last thing I'm going to say, hopefully, on the pragmatic side of this conversation, which is I do not believe that ethereal winds necessarily inspire the soul. It could be that the soul inspires ethereal winds, or vice versa. It could be that when a certain anomaly happens in ethereal winds that behave in a current that we might call life, the soul has an opportunity to participate in that structure and give it its own sense of identity. But there is a sliver of thought out there that every single thing in the universe is alive. And simply because it can't communicate with you on your terms, we poo-poo it out of existence, which I think is a very sad idea. Now, it would seem that there might be some correlations between the soul and the body. Let me give you some ideas. When you feel guilty, there's this weird biological thing that falls upon you. When you feel sad, there's a weird biological thing that falls upon you. When you are thrilled to death, your body exudes this amazing adrenaline, dopamine, what have you. Now, on the scientific side, they simply say this is the result of those chemical stimulants in your mind. And we have to absolutely positively acknowledge that drugs are capable of creating all those emotions. Everything on the color wheel of emotion, drugs have been designed to give it to you, from straight up suicidal depression all the way up to euphoric being one with the universe. Those exist. We know they do. So why would the soul be involved with anything? It's because there are things that are unexplained, that we believe we have triangulated the existence of a soul. Again, like I said, out-of-body experiences. Me believing that I've met Walt Disney, who tells me where Bob Gurr is in the park, so I can walk right up to him and say hello. That doesn't make any sense in a Kurzweil model at all. But let me ask you a question here that I think is important that we must assert onto the conversation. It can be an irrelevant conversation, question at the same time. So let me give you all of the three options that I think we can discuss here. If there's a soul, is it the body that acknowledges the soul, that gives us feeling and senses and consciousness? Is it the soul that has to acknowledge the body to create our consciousness and all forms of input? Or are they disjointed things that just happen to perform together to create consciousness as almost a mistake or some interesting relationship? You know, when you see a whale swim in the ocean, they have all these little fish that swim, stuck to them, barnacles and fish that swim by it because it's the big daddy. They aren't the same creature, as far as I know, but they swim together as if they are. Why is it that folks that get into this kind of stuff tend to get very spiritual, and they get very calm, and they tend not to worry about death? They tend to get closer to the concept of reincarnation. They tend to lose their organized religion. They don't, lose their belief in God, but they just simply let go a little bit of all the paradigms that they've been taught. Mothers who have amazing connections with their children, even though their children are on the other side of the planet. The children gets in harm, the mother feels it, the mother makes the phone call, and the kid says, "Oh my God, yeah, that just happened to me. This thing to that severity that you were warned about." Relatives who die, they come and visit us. Say, "I'm on the other side, I'm all right." All these experiences. In the end, you wake up every day and you are what you are. But the problem with me saying any form of that is that it sort of insinuates and suggests that you immediately quantify your existence in certain, I take up this much space, I'm 5'10", I weigh this much, and all this other stuff. And it tends to lock you in a box. Now, if you woke up and I had a little thing that said, you are one with the universe at all times, you simply don't know it. But it is your journey in being alive to know it, to feel it 100%. But I'm not giving you the manual on how to figure it out. I'm going to give you pamphlets, brochures, tiny little things that suggest where you need to start your treasure hunt for who you are. You could go up to a Tibetan temple, spend 10, 20 years. They are going to be authorities on the subject matter. You can go talk to various Hindu gurus, preferably the ones that aren't that famous, taking money from thousands of people. But they will advance your thinking further. In the end, you get rewarded with a three-dimensional version of yourself that you never imagined. But even me saying 3 dimensions is robbing you of all the dimensions that you would get. You know, since we really discovered that the world is being manipulated quite a bit by banking institutions, we have had the phrase coined into our lexicon, which is hidden in plain sight. I like that. I like that whole thing, because that is the best way to hide anything in the world, is in plain sight. Once you try to get a complex location to hide something, then it becomes more trivial and obvious to those who think deviously about where one might hide something. Well, what if what we truly are is hidden in plain sight? It's hidden right under our nose. The movie Branded, of which I mention every 10 episodes or so, is a brilliant episode, and it's a movie. It's an indie movie filmed in Russia, I believe, that really shows how there could be, this alien race that essentially feeds on man's lust for objects. And because that is what they feed on, they create objects that we must lust for. And the way it was portrayed best in the film was that a little fat boy, little Augustus Gloom kid, wanted some ice cream. And his mother was a weakling that couldn't tell him no. And she takes him up to get the ice cream, and the little sub-alien is connected to the back of his neck, the base of his neck, which is very soul-body-ish, right? We mention the base of the neck because that is one of the kill points for the human body that is absolute. You break your brainstem, you are dead. It doesn't matter what else happens, you break that thing, you're shut the fuck off. All right? So they connect this thing to this little fat boy's body, and he walks up to get his ice cream, and the second that he gets the ice cream and takes a lick of it, he no longer has the lust algorithm going. So the little alien snips off from his neck naturally and floats up to the mother brand, which is whatever brand made the ice cream happen. And they're milking us from all angles, McDonald's and Nike and everything. All they want us to do is lust for things. Well, the soul could be some apparition that constantly flows through us, giving us identity. If we are the red dye that goes through the current in the water that moves on, then we would have to probably say that we are one consciousness simply going through all of the light bulbs in the Christmas tree. Observed from the relative point of the lightning of the light bulb itself, we could ask the light bulb, "What are you?" And he says, "I am a red light bulb." And you ask the green one, she says, "I'm a green light bulb." But in the end, it's powered by soul energy that flows through all of them. Why do we have this Gnostic ability to pull information straight out of the universe if we open our mind to it? Because the entire universe's knowledge base is the force by which we are actually powered on a consciousness level. We think in electrons and we think about electricity, and we have no problem perceiving that. But if I say replace an electron with consciousness, whole global omnipotent God consciousness flowing through us, like water going down the most beautiful waterfalls in existence. And each little tiny bump and nook and cranny in the ground is a being. That's suddenly too abstract for the mind to believe, right? I think we need to go there. I think we need to go there in a really big way. I think we need to explore the absolute esoteric. And I think that as a group, if you're interested in this sort of thing, I think it's up to us to start to parse where we haven't looked before. Like when I put my fingers on my eyes and I felt like my body was becoming an eyeball. It was amazing. It was very, very vivid and very powerful and much different than anything I've ever perceived my skin to be doing before, right? But let me break for 1 second in the middle of this conversation and remind us all that we know that these conversations are fairly rare in the world, right? what is there, like nearly 1,800 subscribers to this channel, but goddamn, it goes slow, right? So, in terms of opening the minds of man to appreciate what we're saying, we have to get our crap together at this elevated level of discussion. And then we have to boil it down so everyone else can understand it as well. And then someone has to write a paper that's sort of the Big Bang version of our idea, such that the world can start having the conversation. So they have the words to have the conversation, the visual aids to have the conversation, right? The most basic thing I think we can repeat to each other is that the society closes our minds. That's what it does. From the moment we're born to the moment we die, you're more closed off than you could possibly imagine. Now, there is a bit of an explosion, of course, when you're a child and you grow and you learn your senses and you learn that there's something bigger than your bedroom, and then there's the house, and then there's a school, and then there's a field, and Jump on a plane, you realize the world's out there. You get on the internet as a teenager, you realize there are people in other countries. So there is a bit of an expansion, but for everything that expands your mind and your perception, I believe that we are being expanded into constraints, right? But there are two families of constraints. There is the tangible reality, which we recognize as the atomic reality, our mass energy models, and then there's the consciousness side of the game. But now let's double back on both those and describe the words that we use and the concepts that we use to acknowledge either one of those hemispheres to each other, right? How do we do it? We talk about the senses. Oh my God, I took LSD and the first thing I felt was this warm liquid kind of crawling up my back and going over my head, and then I laid down and I saw these amazing things, and then I heard this motorcycle go by, or I heard some really gangster rap music, and then what I was seeing started to transform to be really dark and scary, and we turned it off or it drove by. I could feel the wind on my body, and I got this pulsing energy of flickering awareness on my skin as the drug continued to Bordeaux and create, high tides and low tides. Our vocabulary is utterly constrained by our perception of senses. But now let me ask you, aside from science fiction, and perhaps these are legitimate ideas of seeing dead people, seeing auras, and that sort of thing. If I asked you very quickly to come up with another sense that has never been itemized by man before, how long would it take you to come up with even a couple words strung together to give me the notion that you've actually perceived of a sense that we haven't discussed already in some form or fashion? It's tough, right? It's about like me saying, please think up a number set that has never been used before. Not a different base, but you're not to use 1 through 0. You're to use something else to indicate quantity, to indicate relationships between quantities. I once had a masseuse way back in, probably 27 years ago. She said that she was visited by aliens quite frequently. She had a lot of sleep paralysis. She said she only needed to sleep a couple hours a night, which was interesting. And she said her husband corroborated everything that happened to her. I never met that man. But she said that the aliens that she met use colors as math. That when you add, red and blue together, you get purple, right? So for them, it's 3 and plus 4 equals 7. I thought that was very interesting. Why not? As long as it's discernible, why not? But isn't it interesting that once we push the mind into a new area, into a new category of thought, there is pain. There is a weird pain. When you're reading a book and learning something very complicated, you get tired, and you feel sort of a pain and fatigue of like, God, I don't know if I've got this. It's sort of like the same sort of exhaustion you feel when you're doing manual labor or you're hiking up a really steep hill. You just put one foot in front of the other and eventually it'll top out. But you want to quit. Deep down inside, you want to quit. But if you don't, amazing things occur, right? You get to the top of that trail. You finish roofing that house. And I'm going to tell you right now that if we can get some sort of communication established, or you guys can point me to something that is well established, that is a great metaphor for this whole thing, we can advance our thought. The gut feeling is a very interesting one that is very widely discussed and accepted in the Asian communities. They'll ask you about a business deal or a personal decision. Well, what's your gut say? And they almost always go with their gut, which is probably one of the reasons why they're successful at things. Because I don't think the gut has the ability to lie. The gut is the de facto lie detector test of whether or not you're full of shit or not. Or whether or not someone else is around you. What do we gain if we can come up with another sense? I think that one of the definitions of a sense is power and control. I really honestly believe that. They talk about the atomistic era of man when the spiritual and the physical were actually always perceived as an interchangeable coexistence. I like that. But we have been in such a pluralistic society where man and God are separate. And we've been in that since, people realized they could control man by instilling such a paradigm in the mind of man, closing off, again, the spiritual world, right? That we have a hard time perceiving of any other reality. And even though we can conceptually think about the spiritual world and this world being together, it's still tough to come up with a daily mechanic if that were to become believed and thus become reality for us, right? One of the upshots of this sort of conversation for me is that it starts to remove the constraints of self-appointed authorities over us. It's not that we're trying to defy them or even specifically address them in any way, shape, or form. What we're essentially doing is walking away from the burden of their existence, of their closed minds that believe that they are higher than us. Right? Does the Pope, who rule over all of the Catholics, is his ability to do so and have predecessors and successors do the same, is that an open mind concept or is that a closed mind concept? I would argue the latter. Perhaps control is only accessible from one being to another if one can convince the other one to close their mind to any other idea. Well, he must be controlled by someone. That's just the way it is. Well then let me put my arm around you and tell you what to do slowly. The other big situation is that we perceive our souls to be sort of, again, like I mentioned in the other episode, a whale swimming in an infinite ocean. We are a soul swimming in an infinite universe with really no accountability because we cannot perhaps engage in anything that's perceived as bad, aka sin. Because all is permitted and no one can be hurt by another. We are truly equal when we are in our pure soul form, but coming down in the contextual wrapper that is a human. Well, then we gain a bunch of interesting perspectives, rules, perceptions, paradigms, senses. Can we operate on this planet willy-nilly in a completely chaotic cloud of humanity? I would say as long as people observe common law, perhaps, maybe. It is my belief that folks soon resort to actions which don't benefit others, and probably out of pure ignorance more than stupidity. What if someone in a free society, they said, look, we like throwing things off of high places and watching them hit the ground, and we film them in super fast cameras, and then they come to your house, they go, we need more stuff to throw off the top, and you're like, well, I don't have anything that I can give you, and they're like, but we're taking this because this looks great. And you're like, that's mine. It wouldn't work. They'd have to have common law and some understanding. So becoming completely ethereal-minded and absent to the accountability to each other in this particular paradigm of existence, it just doesn't work long term. perhaps not even short term, right? This is an episode where I am searching just as much as you are. And I don't want to wait until I have everything figured out in order to make an episode. I think it is absolutely obvious that we have a tremendous number of senses. Our mortal coils police a little bit of the senses, but because I believe we do have a mind's eye that is driven by our soul and its connection to the universe, that as long as we can build that relationship up, detoxify our bodies to increase the coax cable to it through our glands and the health of our glands, we will be able to open our minds. It'll be a beautiful thing, right? My approach is to go after the more esoteric improvements in my sensual structure than to go after very specific things. And what I mean by that is that I am more interested in just kind of, it's easy to come back at the other way. If someone says, well, look, you saw Walt Disney at Disneyland in your mind's eye, and he told you where a person was, and he was standing right where he said he was. So let's just acknowledge that and say that there are spirits on the other side. They maintain their gender, they maintain their identity, and they also live where they want to live. They protect it in some form or fashion, right? That's valuable, and we should keep inventory of those things, especially as you've experienced them and you can't describe it to someone else. Fine. That's your bag, and that's what you know to exist. But to pull back in front of that use of the sense, I want to know what sense makes that contextual experience happen. In business, it's good to always ask the question of, what is a particular technology's utility to the universe? Why does it exist? I mean, just go to the absolute core. Take electricity, for example. One might say, well, electricity is good for powering television sets, iPhones, computers. You're not wrong. But perhaps the most fundamental understanding of electricity that we should absorb first is that it creates an ecosystem, a currency, a current of force. It creates an ability for us to distribute force around this globe and perhaps into space. Perhaps we can harvest it from space, right? Once you see the underlying function of electrons over a conductive valence, then you start applying its utilities on top of that core capability. If you are forming a business and you are inventing a technology, it is always good to look at its core utility first and then develop solutions on top of the core utility. Even a reservoir that holds water is a utility of supply. How it is used downstream, whether you take a shower with it, make some food with it, do whatever you want with it, fill your pool with it, that is the use of the overall utility of it being in existence to begin with, right? Reality is a utility. Your soul is a utility. Your soul energy would be a utility. Your body is a utility. And it metabolizes into higher constructs, higher concepts, higher levels of specific functionality that you can use for yourself to live your life, right? Some people say they can feel the life within plants. And I would say that those that cannot feel the life of plants aren't surrounded by plants on any level. I just had a friend of mine travel to a Midwestern location surrounded by beautiful greenery. And their description of how peaceful that place felt was related to the beauty of plants being around them. And they hang around with me enough to know how to articulate the idea that perhaps this is a life force that they are feeling from the plants. Not just a being that creates oxygen for us that we breathe, which is also wonderful. What a beautiful relationship we might have that I exhale what a plant uses as its breathing apparatus and it exhales what I breathe. It's an amazing thing. And yet I give myself the credit of life, the designation of a higher being, and it is very rare that someone gives the equal balance back to a plant, of having the same wisdom, when plants have been on this planet way longer than we have, no matter where we came from. There's so many Chotskys of intelligent design around us, it's incredible. If you believe in intelligent design, and again, you could be an alien buff, a UFO buff, you could be a Christian, you could be something that's existential between the two. You become more powerful intellectually right away. When you can start giving the world a purpose, because you're willing to acknowledge what you see right in front of your face. What are the odds that we have one being that exhales what we inhale, and we exhale what they inhale? What an amazing thing. And what's utterly fascinating about, clear-cutting forests and jungles, Brazil sold off most of their forests to China to cut down, and then during the Olympics they ran some bullshit, global warming bit when they are utterly cutting down the thing that will sustain human life. Unbelievable doublespeak, right? I'm going to wager that there are a number of you, whether or not you would ever acknowledge it in a comment or to another living being, that you feel that inanimate objects, at least one or two in your life, have a spirit. For men, it's usually a screwdriver, a car. Perhaps if you do your laundry as a woman, you might think it's a washer and dryer, because they perform well, they do their job. As soon as they start performing badly, the car starts breaking down or some appliance starts breaking down, you start to anthropomorphize these beings. It has been my personal experience that when you love something and you do take care of it, it works really well, whether it be a human being or an appliance. For those of you who've had heirlooms handed down throughout your family, there's a bizarre sort of sense that we have that there is a remnant, perhaps like the movie The Shining or the book The Shining suggested, which is, it's like burnt toast. Sometimes if someone burns toast in the morning, you can still smell it at night when there's not a single particle of that toast in visible range anywhere because everything was cleaned up. But you can still smell it. Someone gives you the old ball-peen hammer that your grandfather had. And when you hold it in your hand, there's a nostalgic attachment to it. But there's a sense that you can feel through the hammer your relative. Someone gives you an old watch on a fob, right? And you feel like that's part of their being. They touched it, they held it. The patina, the way that the inscription might have been rubbed out of the back of it, has life. Those of you who collect coins, you see the wear and tear on a coin from 1955, and you're thinking, "Oh my God, this was forged right in the middle of the the nuclear scare in the world," or one that's forged in 1969, and it's potentially the era of man landing on the moon for all those people out there. The Hindus believe that when you make love and you orgasm with your partner, that a part of your soul exchanges with their soul. You give a part of it away, which is one reason why they say do not sleep around, because you will give away so much of your soul to other people that by the time you find the person that you're supposed to meet, you do not have a complete being to give to them. You have a partial being. These theories have been made over thousands of years through watching and observing the impact of certain behaviors. Wise people came up with these deductions. And whether or not they are technically correct about what they're saying, let's just say they're technically maybe not correct that the soul exchanges between another person, which I think they're right. There's something else that is equally powerful and truthful about their statements that we simply don't understand because we don't exactly know the moving parts on the other side of consciousness, right? I should say the other side that is consciousness. Most of you who have been involved with someone romantically that it didn't work out, but you're still friends. When you see their picture, when you see them in person, when you think about them, there's this amazing tunnel of connection. It could be 20, 30, 40 years ago that you had this amazing liaison with another human being. It doesn't have to be romantic. There are plenty of soldiers that have fought in war, and they remember the theater of war, and they remember the sacrifice that someone made for them, or just their friendly voice in the middle of utter chaos. And they have a bond forever. And when those people pass away, due to war being a ridiculous machine that we use to, or the bankers use to keep us in debt to them, and we build memorials, and we etch in those memorials the names of our loved ones, our buddies. That's why the Vietnam Memorial still gathers around it soldiers that, it was just like yesterday they lost their best friend or a buddy. I know people that have been in squadrons together, and they thought another person was an absolute pain in the ass. They didn't dislike him or anything. They're like, man, this guy's always just kind of a ornery dude to hang out with. But the second he passes away, the very essence of his intent is understood, and he goes from being sort of an ornery spirit to them to being an absolute hero for the rest of their lives. Perhaps the last moment of their life, they sacrificed everything to save a few, right? These are all driven by senses that I do not believe are acknowledged in any book of quote-unquote science, right? The other religion of existence. If we are to rebuild this place from the bottom up, it is my suggestion that these are exactly the sorts of things that need to be contemplated by those who are interested in it, for those who understand it, understand its mystery. If nothing else, the journey will reveal more about the mystery of the whole thing, right? Let's say you go down this journey for a couple of years, and at the end, you feel like you're none the wiser necessarily on paper. You can't write a book about it because you really didn't discover anything definitive. But the search itself enhanced your own senses that perhaps you didn't realize were augmenting in your mind. They were getting better and more powerful, but you're looking over here to the left, specifically looking for a force or a sense in one region of the world, not realizing over here on your right, things are exploding. So make sure that if you dive into this sort of thinking, to continually do a 360 pan, to look for everything. Because I'm sure that enlightenment is happening all around you constantly, regardless if you know it or not, right? Most of the time, presentations have a nice beginning, middle, and end, right? You're supposed to not go up to the podium, not get on stage, and not lecture unless you have the profound epiphany, the crescendo at the end of the story to enlighten and make the audience go, oh, wow. This conversation is meant to inspire thought, to put forth a quiz for all of us to take on our own terms. Don't worry about my terms. You might engage my terms if you run out of your own terms, but to try and answer these questions. If your response is some gigantic knee-jerk thing back into a paradigm, then I think that most of us will ignore your observation. The comments that show that they are well thought out, that they have a little bit of humiliation in them, and that you don't know everything, but you're trying and you're pushing. Those are the comments that get read by me the most, that inspire me the most to change my mind or to develop my thinking, which result in new episodes. Again, for those of you who come through a podcast exclusively and you hate social media, which I completely understand, you really don't want to get in any type of debate with anyone online, just understand that YouTube comments are typically pretty compartmentalized. Someone will post their comment and walk away. They're not getting into everyone else's comments. If you're that kind of person, then hopefully you have a good rapport with humanity and you're willing to accept other ideas of reality. We have to grow, people. We have to grow as human beings because we've seen what this level of growth creates. And I would honestly say our report card is, if not a F+, it's a D minus, right? Not us in particular, but the overall mean of intelligence and perception of the universe as dictated by beings that are bipedal on this planet Earth. We're we're repairing things. We're gaining traction, but there's a lot of work to do, right? We got to get out of these hate bubbles. And this is a conversation where you get to come to the leather sofas and sit down and relax, and the air is just perfect, and you get whatever you want to pacify yourself, a nice cold iced tea or a nice hot cigar, and think things through. There's a listener out there who has her own channel, Lori Gale. I'm just going to mention her personally. I think she is just a top-notch human being. She goes out and she lives in I believe like Pennsylvania somewhere. Just lives in a gorgeous vista of, well, she walks out of her door and every place she sees is just utterly gorgeous. But with a couple miles in a car and some more footwork, she can get to beautiful streams and rivers and forests. And she goes out into these beautiful areas. I'm envious. And she talks like a real human being. She's super compassionate human being. I'll link her video channel down below for YouTube. But I do not believe she has an audio equivalent, unless some of you have the whatever the hell it is that YouTube has, the extra subscription service where you can download the audio versions to your phone or what have you. But I view her as an ideal human being that fairly observes things, comments on them, and I think that we should strive to be more like that. Peaceful, constructive, loving, understanding, confused by other people's negativity. Be willing to dive straight into the rabbit hole of a crazy belief system and then have the ability to either commit to it full time or to crawl back out of it and say, that was really cool. That was a great adventure, but, I don't know if I believe that anymore. I think that's about it for this episode. Hope you felt me. DeepThoughtsRadio.com for all the feeds. There's video if you're on audio if you're on video. Your two video options are YouTube.com. Just search on Deep Thoughts Radio or search on the same thing on vid.me, vid.me. As far as podcasts are concerned, iTunes or Google Play has it. Again, search on Deep Thoughts Radio. Or just go to the website. Every link is up there. I keep forgetting to mention there's a Patreon account up there. For those of you who want to contribute, I would love to use some of the proceeds to buy a 4K camera. I think that'd be cool. I've mentioned that in the past, but I've never really pushed the revenue model. Let's get out there and explore our senses. Let's explore beyond the obvious, right? When you're alone and you're bored, okay? I shouldn't say even alone. When you're just bored, wherever the hell you are, sitting on the crapper, sitting in an airport, sitting in jam traffic, instead of going to that phone to extinguish your mind, just be in your own skin, be in your body. And if you have any epiphanies whatsoever, please get to a point where you can report them back to us. Right now, there's a locked Facebook group as well. Again, just search on Deep Thoughts Radio. We've had a lot of upticks from a lot of great people. A lot of people have joined the group. And just some great comments and observations. I've been really busy recently, so my replies have been very limited. I typically will have a good night once a week where I can get in there and reply to all you guys and give you some responses. So if I'm not replying, don't take it personal. I'm just really busy. I think that's it. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now. So let's go across. Now, some of you might be asking, why the hell are you belaboring its connection to the body? And the reason why is that the body is a fairly mechanical, easy to... It's going to be a great fucking blooper around the end of this thing.